including 17 works by Vincent van Gogh. The most famous one that's there is this self-portrait with a straw hat. And the reason why the Times likes it so well is because his style changed rapidly during his short career. And you can see the transformation clearly in the paintings that are on display in the Met. They have them sort of in chronological order. After he spent 2 years in Paris, where he saw the works of Impressionists and Neo-Impressionists, his work experienced a turning point, leading him to work toward lighter colors. And here's where he started to work toward lighter colors and use those stark brushstrokes that became his signature. And we'll actually look a little bit more at Vincent van Gogh tomorrow if you tune in. But did you happen to see any of them while you were there?
I think I saw this painting over there.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, tomorrow we'll see more Van Gogh, but this is one of the coolest things about the Met, I think. They have like a little courtyard there as well. They have a really rich collection of non-Western art. So the 4th and 5th centuries BC were a time of worldwide intellectual ferment. You had Confucius and Laozi and Socrates and Plato, and this is the age of the Buddha in India as well. So there's a very wide collection of Buddhist art in the Met, dating from the 5th and 4th centuries BC all the way up to really the 19th century. They have pieces from Nepal, and we'll look at a few of them in more detail today. But Siddhartha, the prince who was to become the Buddha, was born into the royal family in a small kingdom in the Himalayan foothills. Oops, sorry. I'm forgetting about my participants. Okay, in a small kingdom in the Himalayan foothills. His was a divine conception and a miraculous birth at which sages predicted that he would become a universal conqueror. And he was born Hindu into the Kshatriya caste. So that was sort of by birth what his destiny was meant to be. After a yogic meditation beneath the Bodhi tree, he reached enlightenment and henceforth became known as the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. In his middle path, rejecting both luxury and asceticism, Buddhism proposes a life of good thoughts, good intentions, and straight living. Humans are born many times on Earth, so they share some beliefs with Hindus in the subcontinent. And the Buddha spent the remaining 40 years of his life preaching his faith and making vast numbers of converts. Most famously, Asoka, a Mauryan king, converted to Buddhism and used it with his law code that was enforced throughout the empire in the Rock and Pillar Edicts. We actually saw one of those pillars at the British Museum on Sunday. But okay, next, the cremated relics of the Buddha were divided into several portions and placed in relic caskets that were interred with the large hemispherical mounds known as stupas. Such stupas constitute the central monument of Buddhist monastic complexes. And most that you see, like some that are famous in Southeast Asia, are these huge like centers for worship or for meditation. So stupas are enclosed by railing that provides a path for ritual circumambulation. The sacred area is entered through gateways at the 4 cardinal points. In the earliest Buddhist art of India, the Buddha was not represented in human form. His presence was indicated by a sign, such as a pair of footprints, an empty seat, or an empty space. But in the 1st century AD, the human image of the Buddha came to dominate the artistic scene. And the first place we saw that was along India's northwestern frontier. And a big reason for that is because of Alexander the Great's conquest, introducing that more humanistic form of art into the subcontinent of India through his conquest and the subsequent Hellenic world that emerged. So youthful Buddhas began to appear, with hair arranged in wavy curls that resembled Roman statues of Apollo, and the monastic robe covering both shoulders and arranged in heavy classical folds is remnant of a Roman toga, as you can see in this piece here. There are also many representations of the Buddha as a princely bejeweled figure prior to his renunciation of palace life. So let's see if I can find one of those in here. I don't see one that they have right away. Oh, here. Well, that went away. Okay. Okay, contemporaneously, the Kushan period artists in India produced a different image of the Buddha. His body was expanded by sacred breath, and his clean monastic robe was draped to leave the right shoulder bare. So a third influential portrayal of the Buddha evolved in Andhra Pradesh in South India, where images of substantial proportions with serious, unsmiling faces were clad in robes that created a heavy swag at the hem and revealed the left shoulder instead of the right. These southern sites provided artistic inspiration for the Buddhist land of Sri Lanka off the southern tip of India, and Sri Lankan monks regularly visited the area. So I can show this one a little bigger, maybe, if it loads. Okay, so there you see the left shoulder instead of the right. And again, the heavy drapery from that Hellenic, the influence in the Hellenic period. Okay. The succeeding Gupta period from the 4th to 6th century AD in northern India, sometimes referred to as that classical golden age, witnessed the creation of an ideal image of the Buddha. And I'll show this bigger. This was achieved by combining select traits from the Gandharan region. Geez, it's really wanting to zoom in. Okay, there you go. Let's tap once or twice. Okay. Gupta Buddhists have their hair arranged in tiny individual curls, and the robes have a network of strings to suggest drapery folds. With their downward glance and spiritual aura, Gupta Buddhas became the model for future generations of artists, whether in post-Gupta, in Pala, India, or Nepal, Thailand, and Indonesia. Gupta metal images of the Buddha were also taken by pilgrims along the Silk Road to China. So I'm gonna get out of this for a sec. I hope that didn't download. Oh, I exit. Oh, go back. So there's actually, oh, sorry, what's the question? No? Oh, maybe that was just me. So here's sort of commentary from the museum on this particular piece, which is dated in 524 in China. This is one of the first relics to arrive in China.
I'm Denise Leidy. I'm one of the curators in the Department of Asian Art.
Hi, I'm Larry Becker. I'm the Sherman Fairchild Conservator in charge of the Objects Conservation Department.
This is an example of what we call a Maitreya altarpiece. Maitreya is the teaching Buddha of the next cosmic era. So once we manage to destroy ourselves, there will be a need for Buddhism to be brought back to the phenomenal world, and he will come down from his personal Pure Land, and he will teach Buddhism to humanity and everyone else once again. And so the altarpiece really implies this moment of him descending from this paradise. He's shown standing in the center with his hands in gestures of offering and benevolence. He is encircled by a crowd of music-making celestials who are known as apsaras in Sanskrit. And then he has a host of attendant figures, including bodhisattvas and guardians and monks. So Larry, I've just been bragging about the fact that we are the only place in the West to have two of these very early and complicated gilt bronze altarpieces. And so I thought it might be fun for people to understand the issues in dealing with corrosion on something this early.
To hear more, press play.
Okay, so this one's really cool, and there's a 360 view available at the museum too, where you can walk behind it and sort of see the details in the back. But it's interesting to have the portrayals of the Buddha differ so much in the different regions. Hopefully tomorrow, actually, the Rubin Museum of Art has one of the largest collections in the city, with a lot of pieces from Mongolia as well, which is pretty exciting. Then we have Buddhist art. Of course, there's still Buddhist art being created today, but over the following centuries, there emerged a new form of Buddhism that involved an expanding pantheon and more elaborate rituals. This later Buddhism introduced the concept of heavenly bodhisattvas, as well as goddesses, of whom the most popular is Tara, who's pictured here. In Nepal and Tibet, where exquisite metal images and paintings were produced, new divinities were created and portrayed in both sculpture and painted scrolls. Ferocious deities were introduced in the role of protectors of Buddhism and its believers. Images of a more esoteric nature depicting God and goddesses in embrace were produced to demonstrate the metaphysical concept that salvation resulted from the union of wisdom, which was female, and compassion, which was male. And Buddhism traveled a long way from its simple beginnings. So this is the most recent portrayal of Buddhism that I have to share. The next, also recommended by the New York Times, is that the Met has 14% of the world's surviving Vermeer paintings. And this particular painting, I liked to use in my AP World History classes because it sort of depicts changing times of the Renaissance era in Europe and this emergence of a new middle class. There's also an audio analysis of this one, so I'm going to play the audio analysis.
Vermeer is the poet of domestic life in 17th century Delft. There are signs of wealth, the gold-plated pitcher, the jewelry box with a string of pearls, the Persian carpet on the table, but it's the quietness of the moment that he seems to miraculously capture.
And yet, in terms of design, what do we have here? It's a kind of triangle or cone in the middle of three rectangles, the window, the table, the map on the back wall. So there's certainly a balanced geometry to the picture. The colors are mostly restricted to the primaries, red, blue, yellow. So in terms of design, color, light, there is this sense of balance and tranquility. And that really suits the subject, which is the peace, tranquility, well-being of a domestic scene during the decade which was the most prosperous in the Netherlands in its entire history. Of course, he's famously interested in light. And you might look at the forearm raised to the window. It's nothing but a flat, blurry shadow with a flare of light coming from behind it.
Such effects must have been introduced at a late stage of execution, for Vermeer may have worked on a picture off and on for some 3 months, adjusting the composition and often deleting motifs.
That's the poetry of Vermeer. He edits out the obvious and leaves you with something of the psychology. And a man would look at this picture and he'd see a woman that he'd like to approach, but there's something about the vision. It's as if it's in a dream. It's kept at a distance. Everything is in the middle ground. He can't really approach her through the table. It's like a daydream to the presumed male viewer of the picture.
Okay, so the next that's recommended by the New York Times is the sculpture garden that they have at the Met. This is one of my favorites actually, that they have in the sculpture garden, but if you've ever gone, it's this huge like atrium and it's full of marble and bronze statues from Greek and Roman empires. This particular highly ornate and extremely well preserved Roman marble sarcophagus came to the Met and was formally displayed in their country seat. I'm sorry, it came from England. This was a gift from the Dukes of Beaufort in England. And it previously was in their own home, but now it's on display in the Met. In an inscription on the unfinished back of the sarcophagus, it says that it was installed there in 1733. In contrast to the rough and unsightly back, the sides and front of the sarcophagus are decorated with 40 human and animal figures carved in high relief. The central figure is that of the god Dionysus, seated on a panther, but he is somewhat overshadowed by 4 larger standing figures who represent the 4 seasons. let's see, only a very wealthy and powerful person would have been able to commission and purchase such a sarcophagus, and it was probably made for a member of one of the old aristocratic families in Rome itself. The subjects, the triumph of Dionysus and the seasons, are unlikely, however, to have held any special significance for the deceased, particularly as it is clear that the design was copied from the sculptor's pattern book. Another sarcophagus, now held in Germany, has the same composition of Dionysus flanked by the four seasons, although the treatment and carving of the figures is quite different. On the badminton sarcophagus, the figures are carved in high relief and so endow the crowded scene with multiple areas of light and shade, allowing the eye to wander. Oops. And here's that, the other sides. Okay. And the last recommendation from the New York Times, and this is something everyone has seen, most likely, would be the Temple of Dendur, which is the temple it's one of the only full temples, preserved temples in the West. So I can show you a couple images a bit larger. The newspaper article that I had showed was when it was gifted to the United States. Back in the 1960s, when Egypt was constructing a dam, and the original site of this temple was damaged. So it was disassembled and sent to the United States as a gift. But that is always sort of a loaded term. All right, the two columns on the porch rise toward the sky, like tall bundles of papyrus stalks with lotus blossoms. And that's these two back here with lotus blossoms at the top. The sky is also represented by the vultures with their wings outspread that appear on the ceiling of the entrance porch, which I'm not sure if there's a view of them. On the outer walls between earth and sky are carved scenes of the king making offerings to deities who hold scepters. These scenes are repeated in two horizontal registers, and the king is identified always by his regalia and his names. Sometimes it's actually written in hieroglyphs that he is the pharaoh. But here you see the pharaoh presenting gifts to deities. Let's see. The only carvings in these two rooms that are inside the temple are around the door frame leading into the sanctuary and on the back of the wall of the sanctuary, where a relief depicts Pihor worshiping Isis. But let's see if I can find that. No, but here's where it was originally located, and when a dam was constructed there, it was sent again back to the it was sent to the United States. Maybe this is it. No. But a lot of, I mean, there's graffiti on it. Like a lot of these engravings you see were put there much later by either travelers. Like the British Empire at its height tried to promote travel throughout the empire. So there were like tourists in Egypt who put graffiti on the walls of the sculpture. This is, yeah. Even during the Roman Empire, we saw travel. But this particular engraving is from 1820. It's just interesting, 1819. Not a new trend. Yeah, and this is the actual room that it's kept in. If you've been before, there's water in the front there. Pretty neat. Okay. Okay, and next, these recommendations are all from NYC Go, like the tourist site on New York City's website. So the first thing are these Cavett masks. Unfortunately, because of some sort of rights, I can't show a larger picture, but they do have an audio for this as well.
The three masks on the right side of this case represent the spirits of forest plants and animals that were vital to the Binding people of New Britain. The mask in the center has a circular shape to the upper part of the head. This refers to a rounded leaf used to wrap food for ceremonial cooking. On the right, the fork-shaped mask represents the fork of a tree used to make a house post. And the mask on the left, which has a broad triangular form on top of a skinny stalk, refers to the shoulder bone of a pig, an important food animal. George Corbin of the City University of New York explains.
And my take on it, from talking to dozens of different Binding over the years, is that these are meant to commemorate and sort of pay homage to the spirits of the things that they've eaten or killed. And one of the reasons I would suggest that that's the case is if you look at each one of these masks, you'll notice right beneath each of their eyes is a kind of red and black, almost triangular shape patterns. They refer to these patterns as tears.
The masks were worn during a night dance, which is shown in a photograph on the text label.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I could show it a little bit larger, but they have a really extensive collection of masks. That's just one of the most popular to be seen and visited. But this, I'm sure you guys have probably seen it if you were there. It is massive, like absolutely massive. It's 12.5 feet by 21 feet. The picture's going to take forever to get together here, but it literally fills an entire wall at the museum. And this is Washington crossing the Delaware. It was painted in 1851 by a German artist named Emanuel Loos, and it immediately became a sensation on both sides of the Atlantic. Painted in Dusseldorf, Germany. It's not even painted in the United States. Washington crossing the Delaware shows a bold General Washington navigating through the frozen river with his compatriots braving the elements on their way to victory at Trenton. While the painting was in Germany, Loos hoped that this brave episode in pursuit of American independence and Republican rule would stir his fellow countrymen to more liberal reforms. And we saw that in France, where the success of the American Revolution inspired revolution there. And it's later in the 1800s that you see unification of the German states. So Loos went to great lengths to make this portrait accurate. Even his efforts still left many inaccuracies in place. Nevertheless, the 12 by 21 feet painting stirred patriotic emotions of countless Americans who have seen the painting, which now is on display in the American Gallery at the Met. Just some facts about the painting. Washington crossed the Delaware so that his army could attack an isolated garrison of Hessian troops located at Trenton, New Jersey, which if you went to elementary school in New Jersey, you probably have heard that before. Let's see, Washington's attack plan included 3 separate river crossings, but only one made it across. He wanted to lead a force of 1,200 Philadelphia militia and 600 Continentals across the river near Burlington, New Jersey. But he and his 2,400 soldiers ended up crossing roughly 10 miles north of Trenton. And then they would march down to Trenton to surprise the garrison at dawn. Spies and deserters had informed the British and Hessians that Trenton was likely to be attacked. And Hessians are German soldiers, like they were sort of paid soldiers during the Civil War. So that also explains why it was painted in Germany. Many came to the United States, or what was then the British colonies, to fight for the American army in exchange for pay. Or for the British Army, more commonly for the British Army, actually, because the United States didn't have that much money at the time. But the day before, Rall had received 2 American deserters who had crossed the river and told the Hessians that the American army was ready to move. Other loyalists informed the Hessians that an attack was imminent. Also, Washington's force used a collection of cargo boats and ferries to transport his men across the Delaware. So what's depicted here is a little bit of a romanticized version of how this actually went down, because you can't really transport 2,400 soldiers in these small wooden paddle boats. They were using ferries and more industrial sized ships. Another thing, one factor in his favor was the large number of experienced watermen to be found at the crossing site. So they enlisted the help of locals who were used to navigating this river. The crossing was made worse by the arrival of a strong storm that brought freezing rain, snow, and terrifying winds. And the river truly was icy as it was being crossed. By the time that most of the soldiers had reached the launching point for the boats, the drizzle had turned into a driving rain, which again is not depicted in this painting. Let's see. Oh, and they also, in addition to transferring these troops, brought a great quantity of artillery across the river to be able to continue fighting on the other side of the Delaware. So it's less than 300 yards wide at the point where they crossed, which helped ensure a successful journey. But literally, it's huge, and just the grandeur of the frame especially is shocking. Ooh, a native perspective on this work. I'm interested to see that. I didn't notice that before. My computer's not really letting me click. Oh, there we go. Okay. I guess it's in this. Maybe not. Oh yeah, here we go. The boatman pictured in the stern wears native moccasins, leggings, and a shoulder pouch, and likely represents an indigenous member of Washington's troops. Native American warriors fought often decisively on both sides of the war, British and American, according to their nation's interests. In 1778, the United States signed a treaty with the Lenape, which is a tribe based in Delaware, its first formal treaty with an indigenous nation, securing assistance and safe passage through Delaware land in exchange for articles of clothing, utensils, and implements of war. The treaty recognized the Delaware nation's sovereignty, which was not, obviously, they didn't make good on that promise when the war was won. But soon a double crossing of the Delaware took place. Persistent treaty violations by settlers and the U.S. government culminated in the 1782 Gnadenhutten massacre, in which a Pennsylvania militia killed 96 defenseless Christian Lenape. There was actually this summer a seminar that I went to, a different seminar, one on American women in this revolution, but there was one on this massacre that we were just talking about in a Zoom call I had the other night with some teachers that I did a seminar with before. Whoa, literally only 2 of us had heard of it, but now I guess 3. I've heard of it now. So I guess this painting to Native communities often represents the betrayal of the American army in the Revolution, and their failure to make good on promises to Natives who fought for their cause, which, is an old story for us. Now, on Monday, we, if you want to go back and watch Monday's video, we looked at a whole bunch of different pieces by Georgia O'Keeffe, but mostly her cityscapes and earlier paintings. This in the 1930s, this is very characteristic of a lot of her work in the 1930s because she either was visiting New Mexico a lot or lived there. But this cow skull in red, white, and blue, just the brief description that actually there's audio for this one, so I'll play the audio for it and leave the picture there.
In Cow Skull Red, White, and Blue, Georgia O'Keeffe offers us the sun-bleached skull of a cow as though it were a religious relic. O'Keeffe found the skull and other bones on her second trip to New Mexico in 1930. She admired them so much that she had them shipped back to New York so that she could paint them there. O'Keeffe did not see skulls like this one as symbols of death. Their weathered surfaces and jagged edges resulted from many years in harsh desert conditions. For O'Keeffe, they contained the desert's stark and enduring beauty. She was interested in their symbolic power, and not simply their external appearance. Although the skull is precisely painted, appearing very immediate, almost tangible, it's not straightforwardly realistic. She has taken some artistic liberties in deleting certain details and enhancing those that emphasize its harsh beauty. In the 1930s, artists and critics debated what American art should be. The painters known as regionalists focused on the hardships of farm life in an effort to capture the character of the country. But for O'Keeffe, images of animal bones and the mountains of the American Southwest embodied the national spirit more truly. As she said, if people wanted a real American painting, she'd give it to them and make it red, white, and blue.
Right. Okay, another recommendation from New York City's website is the Van Gogh paintings that are on display at the Met. Not Van Gogh, we already looked at Van Gogh, Claude Monet. And there's actually a couple pieces from Claude Monet at the Princeton Art Museum as well, which is really a big deal. He does have hundreds of works, but the fact that we could get some right in Princeton, New Jersey is pretty neat because the Met only has a few. But just from his website, like the biography they have of Claude Monet on his website, and I'll poke through some of these pictures as I share, because this particular bridge, this is the one that's highlighted in the exhibit, but it's based on this real life bridge, and it's part of a series of several different portrayals of it. So Claude Monet is also known as Claude Oscar Monet, and he was the founder of French Impressionist painting and the most consistent and prolific practitioner of the movement's philosophy of expressing one's perceptions before nature, especially as applied to plein air landscape painting. The term Impressionism is actually derived from the title of his painting, Impression Sunrise. So Claude Monet was born in Paris. He was baptized in the local church, Notre Dame de Lorette. And in 1845, his family moved to Normandy, which is on the North Shore of France. On the beaches of Normandy, he met fellow artist Eugene Boudin, who became his mentor and taught him to use oil paints. And most of these are oil paintings. Here's a better picture of the bridge. And they have audio on this one as well.
This painting in 1899, he was 59 years old. His early struggles as an Impressionist painter were behind him, and he had bought a property in the rural village of Giverny, north of Paris. There, he transformed a hayfield into the breathtaking garden depicted here.
A few years before he painted this work, Monet received permission to divert part of the local river in order to make a pond in which to start a water garden. Soon thereafter, he built a Japanese-style wooden bridge, to which he later added on a wisteria-covered trellis. Monet painted his garden over and over again. This picture, which is unusual in its vertical format, shows the Japanese bridge arching from one side of the composition to the other. You see the trees and the foliage above it, but you also see the reflection on the water's surface. It's actually very difficult to paint water, and what Monet has tried to do is show the water lilies resting on the surface of the pond, as well as the reflections of the trees, and then also get a sense of the shadow of the bridge, which you can see at the very bottom of this painting.
To study Monet's development as an artist, I'd like to invite you to walk around the galleries and to look at the different ways in which he painted.
Okay. Well, we won't, but there are a couple pieces at the Princeton Art Museum whenever that opens again. Fingers crossed. This one set a record in 2004. It was purchased for $50 million. Seriously. So this inaugurates the grand tradition in Italian art of envisioning the sacred figures of the Madonna and Child in terms of appropriated from real life. In terms appropriated from real life. The Christ child gently pushes away the veil of his mother. And there's pieces very similar to this at the Princeton Art Museum too. Like when you go up the stairs, the first sort of room on the right-hand side has a lot of these, honestly, I don't know. I'm not an art expert or even really an enthusiast. So I'm just going to use the word creepy to describe the portrayals of this child, not just here in Madonna and Child, but in a lot of them that are in the art museum. Like it looks like a small man. It looks like a grown man, just shrunken down to the size of this woman's arm, which is strange to me, but you know, whatever. I can't really judge. This was a long time ago. Maybe the person who painted this has never really seen a baby. But the beautifully modeled drapery enhances the three-dimensional physical presence, and the parapet connects the fictive or the sacred word of the painting with the temporal one of the viewer. So $50 million. I just can't even. And then later they acquired Madonna and the Child, enthroned with saints. So I'll show this bigger for a moment, and then I'll play the audio for this one. Maybe they can explain. Oh wait, this baby looks. Oh, look at that baby. That's a cute baby. That's better. Still like has some very adult features, but like definitely more baby-like. Okay, so let's listen.
We see Raphael accommodating the conservative.
The Metropolitan Museum is incredibly fortunate to have the better part of one of Raphael's major early altarpieces.
Raphael was only 21 when he painted it for a convent in the Italian city of Perugia, where he then lived. The nuns evidently insisted on the elaborate clothing of the Christ child. In the altarpiece, we see Raphael accommodating the conservative taste of local artists and patrons. Curator Andrea Baer.
Look, for example, at the fluttering ribbons or the sweetness, the dolcezza of the heads and faces of the Virgin and the two female saints.
But while he was painting the altarpiece, Raphael left Perugia for Florence.
And there his life and his art changed forever. And we actually see this change documented in the altarpiece here, in the shape of the two male saints. You can see immediately that they are painted with a greater monumentality. Their beautifully modeled heads and the way that they seem to stand firmly on the ground. All of this comes to Raphael through his first viewing of the works of the great Florentine artists.
Here, Raphael also elevates the Virgin on a throne that further enhances a quality of monumentality.
Look at the way the male saint to the right casts his shadow against the bottom steps of the altarpiece.
Okay. So this one, the dancing class, I like this one a lot. I don't really have a reason why, but it's very cute. Oh, look at this little violinist. I just noticed him. And for some reason, a watering can. Not really sure what's going on with that. But this is Degas's first depiction of a dance class. Because the artist did not yet have privileges to go backstage at the Paris Opera, his subjects came to his studio to pose. These sessions yielded many large study drawings, which Degas subsequently adapted for other compositions. In the late 1870s, he explained, "I've painted so many of these dance examinations without having seen them that I'm a little ashamed of it." So what I'm guessing is that a lot of these figures he had sketched previously and then put them all together in the same painting, which is interesting. Sort of like a figure drawing class. They also recommend This Mobile by Alexander Calder. He was born into a family of sculptors. And this particular mobile was included in the 1942 exhibition Artists for Victory. That's right in the middle of, right at the end of World War II, at the Metropolitan, where the sculpture committee awarded it a prize and recommended it be added to the collection. And most of his works are made from sheet metal, which are cut into various shapes and assembled in a chain-like system. A lot of mobiles, if you will. A lot bigger than you're expecting too. This Aristotle with a bust of Homer. Aristotle is born, well, he lived from 384 BC to 322 BC, and Homer is said to have been born around 850 BC, so about 500 years prior, and that's according to Herodotus, who lived from 484 BC to 424 BC. So the idea here is he's inspired by an earlier muse, Homer, who wrote, you guys probably read the Odyssey, right? What's in the chat? Yeah, so you guys probably read the Odyssey. So this is the guy who wrote the Odyssey and one of the latest Greek philosophers. Oh man, I really like Jackson Pollock. That was my favorite unit in middle school art class. This Autumn Rhythm number 30 from 1950 has a more muted color scheme than most of his works, but yeah, when you look in close, there's so many different layers of these splatters. He was actually born in Cody, Wyoming. I'm going to stay there in an Airbnb this August if I'm allowed, because it's right by Yellowstone National Park. And throughout his childhood, they lived in a succession of truck farms in Arizona and Southern California. When he was 16, he first studied art at Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles, where he met two friends who later became artists and helped elevate his career. He had his first one-person exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum, somewhere we'll go tomorrow. So from 1942 until his death in an automobile crash at age 44 in 1956, his volatile art and personality made him a dominant figure in the art world and in the press. Yeah, this is an entirely new category of art, though, that we saw in the 1950s and really came right at this moment of cultural change. Like, we're using the term teenager for the first time. There's more angst, there's more expression. So it was sort of the perfect environment for his work. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this one has audio, and I'll pop through the pictures as we listen. Oh, I guess the audio is not working. Oh well. Okay, but the subject of this intensely romantic work is derived from Canto the 33rd of Dante's Inferno, which describes how Pisan trader court Ugolino della Gherardesca, his sons and grandsons were imprisoned in 1288 and died of starvation. Ooh. And you see the detail. The reason they say romantic is because it's sort of like an elevated portrayal of what reality is. Like, the figures are portrayed as more beautiful than what they would be in real life. But it reflects the artist's passionate reverence for Michelangelo, specifically for the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel of the Vatican in Rome, which we'll actually see tomorrow if you tune in. But just because of the detail on this. And how clear its inspiration is. New York City recommended it. This relief panel also is one of the oldest pieces in the museum. It's almost 3,000 years old. It's from the palace of the Assyrian king, Ashurnasirpal II. So it's probably the king himself and an attendant. So here's the king and here's an attendant. The king is immediately identifiable by his crown, a distinctive truncated cone with a smaller cone emerging from the center and a long streamer hanging from his back. The king carries a sword on his left hip. as well as 2 daggers tucked into his clothing, and his left hand holds the tip of a bow. And Assyrian kings are typically portrayed with a lot of weaponry because it was so important to the culture in Assyria. There were violent floods in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates River where the civilization rose, and therefore there was a lot of fighting over like lands that were usable for agricultural production. And the Assyrian was the first sort of empire to actually develop in the region, because you had Mesopotamia, which was a bunch of city-states, but once that began to decline, Assyria was one of the first to emerge. Bye, Sean. Okay. Last one, animals in motion. This was actually commissioned by a former governor of California, and it's photographs, one of the first pieces of photographic art, which is really interesting. All right. Oh, just kidding. This one's the last one. This one's the last one, and I have audio for it, and then I will sign off. Oh, maybe I don't have audio for it. Oh, just kidding. But this bullfighting painting was actually like observed under infrared reflectography, or IRR, which visually enhances the rapid and gestural painting technique used for bullfight. So this one has actually been enhanced by museum curators, which is interesting. But this was their last recommendation, just because of the process that it underwent once it was acquired by the museum. All right, but any questions about any of the pieces? Okie dokie. I'm gonna sign off too, and I'll put this up so if anybody wants to watch, they can later. But thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your spring break.
Yeah.
Bye.